Joana Guimarães graduated in forestry engineering at the University in Portugal in 1987. She has an MBA for Oporto Business School in Porto, Portugal. She currently works as an executive development director at the Portuguese certification body. Here, she's in charge of developing new services and technical updates for management systems, product and service certification, and is responsible for technical support. Her areas of responsibility include quality management systems, innovation management systems, sustainable forestry management, and chain of custody. Joana, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Hello to everyone. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the auditing practices group of ISO TC 176 and its role in defining good auditing practices. I will talk a little bit why the subject is important in the context of auditing, who is the auditing practices group, how it started, and a little bit of a story. What are the challenges of auditing according to ISO 9001-2050, and how can auditors and practitioners use the APG papers to help auditing these new clauses? Talk a little bit about old challenges, auditing, and finally, how to get involved with APG. The challenge of auditing ISO 9001 to 2015 is that we audit organizations of all kinds in every sector of the economy and the society and everywhere around the globe. So this encompasses a wide variety of organizations in different contexts. To do that, we use a standard that aims to apply to all of them, which is by itself a huge challenge, and that is ISO 9001. We also use a standardized process to conduct an audit, and that is documented in ISO 1911-01 and 17020-01 when we talk about accredited audits for certification. And we use also qualified persons that have very different backgrounds in terms of experience, education, and skills. So these are our main tools to perform the audits. Why do we do the audits? To reach valid and consistent conclusions on the conformity of the quality management system of the organization, to comply with the requirements, and also on its ability to deliver the intended outcomes and achieve the organization's quality objectives. So we have to ensure the principle that we audit consistently and that two different auditors with valid qualifications for that sector, for that organization, would reach the same conclusion in similar circumstances. That seems very easy to do so because we have very objective standard requirements like ISO 9001 or very good guidance on how to audit like ISO 1911-01. But for those who are in the field auditing know that this is a very challenging issue and is far from being demonstrated as generally achieved at a global level. So keeping this challenge in mind and attentive to the reality and difficulty to ensure a competent and consistent performance during an audit, and with information on the problems encountered, ISO TC 176, the ISO Technical Committee responsible for publishing ISO 9001 and other standards related to quality management, created APG, Auditing Practices Group. In this session, we are going to talk about the many challenges an auditor has to overcome to do a reliable and competent job, and how the papers of APG can provide good examples and prevent common mistakes. We will have a look at a few examples of APG papers, so you can judge for yourself and maybe feel the curiosity to explore further these papers. And finally, we will invite you to participate and contribute to APG and the work we do. Remembering the basics, ISO 9001 defines requirements for a quality management system where an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, and aims to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system, including processes for improvement of the system and the assurance of conformity to customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. All requirements defined in ISO 9001 serve this purpose and the ability of and help the organization to demonstrate that it can consistently meet and deliver these intended outcomes. The main challenge in ISO 9001 starts when we define a standard that is applicable to any kind of organization in any sector, regardless its type, its size, the place of the globe where it is located, the products and services it provides. To achieve this, the standard is written in broad terms that allow it to be applied to any kind of organization. Being a requirement standard, it does not provide guidance on how to implement, and it could not do it. This characteristic of being generic and applicable is one of the major strengths of ISO 9001, because it allows to build a brand over the past more than, I don't know my heart, but since 1987, so I think 30 years, to build a brand and to build something that is recognized at a global level, and that means the same whether we are in a health care facility, in an industry, in a local government, or any other kind of organization, in a service organization. But it also poses a major challenge when we audit an organization according to it, because there will be a huge variation between organizations that apply ISO 9001. The standard defines very clearly the intended outcomes that we mentioned earlier, and requirements are described very objectively. All the things that a quality management system needs are in the standard. But the products and services the organizations provide, the degree which they are defined, for many organizations, requirements of the products are perfectly defined and understood between the organization and its customers. When we move from industry organizations to service organizations, this might not be the case. So the degree of formalization and the speed of change of the requirements and the needs of expectations of its customers will make things more complex and differentiate things amongst the organization. The regulatory context of the organization might also be very important and allow for a great variation on the things we have to audit. On one side, a huge regulatory context for a product or a services makes the work apparently easier because we have the requirements determined, and that is a good for the products and services, and that is a good starting point. But the burden and the amount of requirements can also be another aspect to take into consideration when performing an audit. Organizations can be very complex, work in different cultures with different people that within the same organization also have very differentiated cultural and educational aspects. They can use more or less outsourcing and have several other factors that determine that each quality management system is very different from each other. and attend to the standard requirements in many different perspectives. So we won't find quality management systems equal. We won't find the same solutions and the same problems. So the first challenge for an auditor is the interpretation in the audit context. He needs to interpret the standard and to assess if the organization is applying the standard in an adequate way to achieve its intended outcomes. At the same way, he cannot deviate from what would be a consistent application of the standard. He has to reach sound and consistent audit conclusions, irrespective of the specificity of the organization. When the auditor is performing the audit, its audit objectives are very clearly stated. He needs to collect information and objective evidence that allows them to determine the audit conformity of the quality management system with ISO 9001 requirements. Does the organization build its quality management system complying with ISO 9001 requirements? Is the system adequate so it can the organization consistently demonstrate that it provides products and services that meet the requirements? To fulfill those objectives, audit teams have a limited amount of time and use sampling to interact with the persons in the organization, to observe activities, infrastructures, products, services, to collect and analyze information and documents, to compare evidence gathered with the requirements to determine conformity, to make judgments to reach audit conclusions. They do this in a limited amount of time, and that is the second challenge. They have a limited amount of time to reach these valid conclusions. Therefore, they need to focus on the most critical system functions that ensure the organization can achieve the intended outcomes and apply the standard as a mold and improve the standard effectively and achieve its organizational objectives. So they frequently use one of the main characteristics of the standard, that the organization applies the PDCA approach. So the organization has monitoring mechanisms to obtain information on its ability to achieve its intended outcomes, to reach its objectives, to deliver conforming product. And the first step is to go to this, to assess the way the organization does this monitoring as a starting point to sample other functions of the system and to confirm in the field that the monitoring of the organization is adequate and she's reaching valid conclusions. So the focus on critical aspects of the system, like operational processes, because they will need to have a very good, auditors need to have a very good assessment on the ability of the organization to deliver its products and services. They will also need to have trust on the demonstration of compliance with contractual, statutory and regulatory requirements of the products and services provided. They also need to look at client satisfaction and at improvement. This focus is required to reach valid conclusions in a limited amount of time, but this also implies that the application of the standard is not assessed integrally in any audit, requirement by requirement. I'm not sure about the exact amount of requirements that ISO 9001 contains, but requirements are defined in the form of the verb use shall, and I believe something like more than 130 requirements will exist in the standard. Definitely, that's not the work of an auditor, and it doesn't need to be like that to reach a valid conclusion. But these can have very differentiated impacts in the organization. the most important of which is that probably we're not exploiting the standard to identify opportunities to improve the organization QMS. We are assessing its ability to achieve the intended outcomes. We are, although not explicitly, but implicitly having a risk-based approach to audit, which is perfectly correct. But we are not focusing also on the use of the standard to improve its quality management system. And for many organizations, this can have a huge impact, because they could, if audits could be more challenging in the requirements they explore less, they could take more advantages in the application of the standard, and they could develop its system to be more effective and efficient. Now let me talk a little bit about the third challenge. Auditors are the tool that we use to perform all the audit work, and they are human beings. They are persons. They have very demanding qualification requirements. This, in fact, has been one of the things that has been worked in a more systematic way by the accreditation rules and by the ISO 17021 series of standards, and all the process to assess the qualifications of auditors have evolved greatly during the years. They need to study constantly, they need to be monitored, they have very, very demanding requirements for their qualification. But nevertheless, they are persons, and they do not know everything they will encounter in every organization. It's in his hands that has all the burden to perform the task of collecting objective evidence, compare it with the audit criteria. In this case, we are talking about ISO 9001, and make judgments on the conformity of the organization. Even when auditors are very competent, they will have different backgrounds, they will have different educations, they have worked in certain sectors where certain things are more relevant than others. Within the organizations they worked, they have not worked on every areas. One have worked in design and development, other were more operational, other worked on quality management. And this background has a great influence in their work. It will allow them to give more competencies to audit certain aspects, and less easiness, and in audit other things. They will be more aware of certain problems, they know better, and will tend to focus in areas where they are more comfortable, which is perfectly acceptable. But acceptable in the terms of it's normal, although it has to be worked upon, so auditors can continually improve its work and its confidence to audit all the organization. Although there are several mechanisms in place to ensure a consistent application of the auditor's work, we can't ignore that this variation exists and needs to be addressed, and ultimately will never be removed. And as many other things, this risk has also other opportunities, because many times it's the differentiated background that auditors have that allows them to make questions that poses valid, that allow the organization to reflect on its quality management system, and that really allow him to perform a good audit work. Stating the main challenges related to auditing. The Auditing Practices Group aims to address these challenges by providing good examples, ideas, and explanations on audit practices. calling the attention to common mistakes and how to prevent them, as well as sharing practices on new topics. TC 176, I imagine you probably all know, but in case you don't know, it's the technical committee in ISO responsible for the publication of ISO 9001, ISO 9004, and other standards on quality management. The Auditing Practices Group is an informal group of quality management system experts, auditors and practitioners drawn from the ISO Technical Committee and the International Accreditation Forum. The outputs of APG are published in the form of papers and are freely available to read and download at ISO TC 176 subcommittee website. In this presentation, you can connect to this link and access directly the page of the Auditing Practices Group papers. The guidance provided by the APG is primarily aimed at QMS auditors, consultants, and quality practitioners, but is not definitive. The papers reflect a number of different views. They are prepared by different people and address different topics in different contexts. Their content may not always be consistent and definitely is not applicable to all situations in every case. This is an informal group. Whenever they consider something is worth sharing with other auditors, or that there is a problem we need to address because a bad practices is in place, we issue a paper on that case, and that may be relevant to some cases and not relevant to others. We don't intend that the guidance that we provide in the papers is used as specified requirements. We don't want to add anything to the standard or to the organization requirements, or make interpretations or use as industry benchmark or criteria that all QMS auditors, consultants, or other practitioners have to follow. Another important aspect to keep in mind is that these papers were not subject to an endorsement process by the ISO. As I told earlier, they come from an informal group. They are published. They do not represent an official position of ISO TC 176, being balloted by all the mirror committee members that participate. The information contained is available for educational and communication purposes, and we don't take any responsibility for any errors, omissions, or other liabilities that may arise from the provision or subsequent use of such information. To make a brief history of APG, because APG is more than 15 years, ISO 9001-2000 edition was a major revision that introduced the process approach alongside with PDCA cycle, raising the standard to a more managerial level. Shortly after its publication, many CBs, many auditors, and other interested parties noticed that several auditors had difficulties auditing by processes, shifting for what was the very criticized approach of the auditing according to 20 clauses, using the standard and checking conformity to requirements, like asking for the papers and the procedures and the documents to have evidence that the clause is being complied, to an approach where the organization and its quality management system are in the center of the assessment. We are looking at the organization, the way it implemented the quality management system, the way the quality management system is adequate to provide its products and services to its customers, how they improve, how they define their objectives, and how they can reasonably expect to achieve those objectives. This focus is quite different from the old focus by that time, and was considered that auditors are not yet doing this, and they should focus on auditing by processes. And that is the beginning of APG in somewhere in 2002, 2003. So the group was created to assist auditors on how to conduct audits following the process approach. By that time, many papers were issued. And since the foundation, the group was convened by Mr. Alex Izrakovic, that retired very recently, and that has been responsible for the entire work published. So, and to keep this group alive and all the papers updated. The other group members are mainly experienced auditors, as well as other experts with a relevant background and interest in the good application of ISO 9001. The papers were, when they were done, they were so welcomed by the certification bodies. Many CBs use it to train their auditors. They incorporated many of the guidance in their auditors' guidance, and a twin initiative was followed at IAF level, giving good papers on how accreditation auditors should conduct its auditors and providing clarifications. When you go to the ISO TC 176 subcommittee to a website, you can also find the accreditation auditing practices group papers in between, quite closely to the APG papers. As an informal group, any member of the group can propose a paper or can propose an issue to be debated or a paper to be revised. Then the group works in a very informal way, and any proposal is revised by the group to see if we are in alignment with what is being said, if we want to improve, if there is anything that seems conflicted. Then it's edited and published and made available in the website. ISO 9001-2015 was published in September, and the group felt the need to revise the papers and update them to the new version of the standard. This was more than an editorial review of changing the year of the standard, as there were new requirements that disappeared, things that are now clear, so a complete revision was performed. During these revision processes, several improvements were made. One of the improvements was to merge all the papers about similar issues and to have less papers. That's what we did with the papers related to process, eliminating issues no longer relevant to the new standard. Some papers disappeared. Organizing the papers by a logical sequence and divide them in three sections. We have a section where papers related to general issues are grouped. We have a section related to auditing in general terms that can be applicable to any kind of management system. And then we have a section that has all the papers related to auditing to ISO 9001. Also, with the publication of 9001-2015, there was a need to create new papers to address new issues like risk-based thinking, context, and organizational knowledge. During this work that was performed in 2015, the group had the time to reread the paper, to revisit all things and reflect on the work done and its present relevance. Some papers were very old. A few of them were even eliminated because they were no longer relevant. But the main thing that the group conclude is that many of the examples, the explanations, are still required in present days and are valid and need to be more fully disseminated. So we couldn't find, no, this doesn't no longer make sense because this is already integrated into present practices in a global and consistent level. No, maybe it's more used and better used by many people, but they need to reach more auditors and practitioners. The group also concludes another important thing, that it needs more feedback from the users to move forward, to identify new problems, to address new needs. Now, we will show some examples on some of the papers and parts of their content, so you can have a more concrete idea on what you can expect to find there. We grouped, we select the new papers because we think transition is at its peak. Transition audits to 9001, 2015 are at its peak, and we need to think about how to audit risk-based thinking, how to audit context, how to audit organizational knowledge. But we also need to audit the old challenges that are still needed to be addressed and developed by all of us. I'm talking about auditing an organization by processes, focus on the intended outcomes of the management system, auditing design and development, and the scope of the management system. So now I'm going just to give a very few elements on what you can find on the papers and invite you to explore them in more detail. And if you think they need improvement or they don't answer to all your questions, your feedback is very welcome. Let's start by the context. In order for an organization to have an effective quality management system, it's important that the system is aligned with its strategic direction. There's no point in having a quality management system that goes on the other way or that contradicts the way the organization wants to go. And this has to take into account the relevant internal and external issues when planning to achieve its objectives. To be effective, planning in the organization needs that the organization understand where she is, what it wants to achieve, and how it's going to achieve it, its strategy. We can't know clearly, if we don't know clearly the starting point for your journey, then it will be very difficult to achieve the desired destination. So this standard, this part, understanding the organization and its context, is telling that to the organization. And auditors need to evaluate whether the organization has addressed these issues properly and in an adequate and at a pace, at a rhythm, updating it in a way that is relevant in the context where she performs. There are many ways and supporting techniques to observe and analyze the context. You can find a list of many of these examples in the paper. The standard, as you might remember, has no requirement for documented information, but the output from this activity should be evident in the determined risks and opportunities, because the risks and opportunities derived from this analysis of the context. Although there's no requirement for documented information, of course, most organizations will find it useful to retain documented information. How do we know that we assess? How can we improve our practices? how can we know if we make a good assessment on our context, either external or internal, if we don't understand the rationale and the level of understanding that we had when we analyze it and set our objectives? What were the things that we knew? What were the things that we did not knew and know that we did not knew? And what are the surprises? This is very critical because it will allow the organization to learn with this process, to know if she's looking at relevant issues in an adequate manner. So it's not a requirement. You cannot file a non-conformity on this, but it will surely be something that you can expect in many organizations will already have it and will expect you to audit this part, and maybe it's a way to further improve the quality management system. We consider at APG that this area, understanding the organization and its context, should be approached when interviewing the members of the organization's top management, and should be analyzed by interview. Evidence that confirms what is being done by the interview can be adequately demonstrated, showing how the review outputs became the inputs into the QMS planning process following the risk-based thinking. But it is not enough to audit top management the way it inputs relevant issues of the context into the planning of the quality management system to assess if the context is being properly, the relevant issues are being properly identified and addressed. Further exploration of this theme is required throughout the audit to understand the organization review of its context. The paper will give you several examples of techniques related to context analysis, as well as examples and explanations on how to audit the way the organization determines the relevant requirements from its relevant interested parties, how these input the determination of risks and opportunities, how risks and opportunities will inform the decisions related to the scope of the management system that we will speak lately in this presentation, and the determination of processes by the organization. Moving now to another paper, I'm going to talk a little bit about risk-based thinking. The first thing that comes to mind to ISO 9001 practitioners is that risk has always been implicit and addressed in ISO 9001. ISO 9001 is in fact and always has been a standard to prevent the risk of delivering non-conforming product to the client. So many of its requirements are aimed to prevent these risks. So risk and ISO 9000 is not a new combination. But the focus on the risk-based thinking is now placed at and aligned with the PDCA approach. If you remember, there was a clause on preventive action which aimed to prevent the occurrence of non-conformities. Of course, we can discuss that this clause was the last one of ISO 9001, 2000 and 2008 edition. So not a very logical place to talk about prevention when we are closing the standard. This new standard comes to puts the risk-based thinking in the right place at the planning level. ISO 9001 specifies requirements for the organization to understand its contexts, determine the risks as a basis for planning. One important thing is that risk-based thinking considers both risks and opportunities. And opportunities are critical to develop for the organization to improve its quality management system and to develop. If you go, this is a new clause, and if you go to the introduction and to Annex A of the standard, you will find very useful explanations. You will also find more comprehensive information on the paper published by the Community and Support Group, the paper on risk-based thinking that you can find also on Subcommittee 2 website. As obviously, auditing the risk-based thinking is not auditing a clause of the standard and a standalone activity that you put in your plan and said risk-based thinking, and there it is, half an hour or 1 hour to talk about and look at risk-based thinking. It's implicit during the entire audit of a QMS, including when interviewing top management. The paper proposes a step approach to audit risk-based thinking and provides for each step several examples and explanations to implement this approach. I'm going to present the steps very briefly so you can have an idea what you can find in the paper and hopefully look at the paper. First step, what inputs are used by the organization for risk and opportunity determination? How can an organization determine its risks and opportunities while considering while considering the way the inputs that it uses? What type of objective evidence do we need to look for? There are several examples on these, as you might expect, and it's reasonable. The risks will vary a lot between organizations, between the safety issues related to its products and services. The context of the organization will demand for very formal approaches in some cases. And one obvious example is food safety that has specific standards for managing that, to less formal and to less formal approaches. What types of objective evidence shall we ask for? How can an organization address its determined risks and opportunities? What actions are you expected to observe there? What are you looking for when you audit the planning of actions to address risks and opportunities? And finally, and very important, because how does the organization evaluate the effectiveness of these actions? Are these actions addressing effectively the risks? Are these actions adequate to pursue the opportunities? As usual, and the evaluation is performed by the organization is a very important gate to start looking at the system, how they perceive themselves on this approach, and how can we confirm if the way they perceive themselves and their effectiveness is what we find in the field when we go to sample the organization. Organizational knowledge. This is a new clause of the standard, maybe not new to many organizations that have ISO 9001. And knowledge is no more than a resource that is needed for the organization to support the quality management system process and to ensure conformity of the products and services. It is quite obvious, but it was never treated as a resource by itself, not at least separated from people competence or from documentation. So this is the first time that knowledge is addressed in an explicit way. But of course, before that, when we think about having a documented system, we are thinking about managing knowledge, ensuring that the organization has this knowledge available. And for example, mitigating the risk that the knowledge containing people is in the documents, and newcomers can come and learn and do the things as they were. Nevertheless, although the standard addressed this knowledge and also addressed a requirement for competence of people and knowledges in the persons too, it didn't address things like tacit or shared knowledge from experience. This was not explicit. And for these types of knowledge, document control is not sufficient to make it available and usable. As I told earlier, many organizations have already initiated systematic approaches to knowledge and have very mature approaches. In my experience, it's not an easy way, and it's not. These organizations have a long history about a very big need to knowledge management in a very systematic way. So others will be taking their first steps, and for them, this new clause in ISO 9001 will be the beginning to consider this issue that is relevant as we are in the 21st century and in societies where the economy is based on knowledge. So we have to keep in mind that for many organizations, this will be the first time they will start consider this. So we have to consider that everything, 9001 is a PDCA approach to management, and there's always a starting point. The quality management system, a new that is settled for the first time, will be very different from a quality management system of an organization that is already certified 3 years, or from one that is certified since the beginning of ISO 9001, like more than 25 or 30 years. So with knowledge management for many organizations, they will have a starting point that might be modest, but then they can develop and improve their practices. And this is a good way to move to use this requirement, to explore it, to do a better, to take more advantages on knowledge, to protect their knowledge. And these different situations should be addressed properly during the audit, and auditors should bear this in mind. You can't require the same level of maturity to all organizations. But you can also not give up of organizations that have not considered the relevance, that are not yet addressing knowledge management and might have very few needs on this. They will need to consider this and to reflect on this. The paper is providing a full explanation on the concepts. It also provides an explanation on the implications on the audit process, the relation to other clauses, and this can help a lot of auditors understand what is at stake in this issue. That is new either to organizations and to many auditors. We feel that many auditors have still difficulty auditing this requirement, which is normal because it's new, and it's not so it was not so announced as, for example, the risk-based thinking. So the paper is very useful to provide insights on how to audit these, what things to consider. So, making a summary of the requirements, the organization has to determine the knowledge it needs, to make it available, to preserve it, not to lose it if people go away, if the knowledge is in the people and people go away, to protect it, because maybe this knowledge is critical it's a critical competitive advantage, and to acquire and access new knowledge. And we are talking not what kind of knowledge are we talking about? The one that's needed for the operation of the QMS processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. So we have to keep the focus on the QMS when auditing this requirement and not going to other areas of the organization. Now that I present the papers on the new sections of the standard that poses more challenges to auditors, I'm going to talk about an old subject that is in the heart of APG work. It was the reason for its creation, and today we still have a lot of complaints, and we hear a lot of complaints of people saying there's not enough audit by process. So we really need to reinforce auditing by processes, and probably you will see that EPG will produce more papers on this issue because we believe that is not being effectively addressed by globally by the auditors community. We have to understand that 15 years after the publication of ISO 9, no, more than 15, 18 years after the publication of ISO 9001, 2000, auditing a QMS is auditing an organization processes and their interactions, because a QMS is made of processes. Therefore, the first thing is that audits should be planned and conducted by processes and not by clauses of the standard. I know this is a challenge because in the end, we have to conclude and are responsible to conclude if the organization is applying the standard and it conforms to the standard. And so this is a huge challenge because the easy way is to check the requirements of the standard, but then we miss completely the way the organization functions. And keeping this, APG produces a lot of papers on processes, and in the 2015 revision, we merged all these papers and give a complete overview on the theme. So furthermore, we revised the paper on planning, and we provide further guidance on how to make an audit plan according to processes. What can you find in this paper? You can find a full explanation on the process approach and how it's treated in ISO 9001, how is treated in the quality management principles, and this will help you understand the rationale and the need to audit the organization processes and its interactions. When you go to the section related to objectives, inputs, outputs, activities, and resources, you will find how to audit in practice the process approach with examples on questions to fully explore the processes of the organization. Once again, looking at monitoring, you have to keep in mind that processes have to be analyzed, monitored, measured, and improved. And this is the organization that has to do it too. We have to look at this during an audit. And we help. In the last section, we have helping an auditor to interpret the process approach. Many times in many organizations, they still not understand the process approach and its full potentialities. Auditors cannot give consultancy, cannot provide solutions to organizations, because that would take the independence to the audit. But we can take him to the door and without providing any specific solutions. And that's what we do in this section. Finally, in Annex A, we have a full set of questions that you can use to explore and audit the processes of an organization. I sincerely hope you revisit this paper. I haven't said earlier, but papers are very short. This one is a little bit longer, but really it's no more than 3 or 4 pages. You read them in 10 minutes. And so I hope you really Start audit organizations by processes. Of course, when you're in a process that relates to purchases, you have to look at the requirements of related to purchases. When you're talking to sales, you have to look about requirements about communication with the client or contractual revising the requirements of the products and services. But we have to look at the organization in the context of these processes. Expected outcomes. It is, I was having serious doubts if this would be an example to give in this paper, because this is a kind of statement of what expected outcomes are for a quality management system. But they are so relevant and reminding us why we use 9001 system, why an organization uses 9001 system, and what is our work as auditors to assess this quality management system. So, for the defined certification scope, an organization with a certified quality management system has to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and aims to enhance customer satisfaction. We use the term aims because not always is possible to improve customer satisfaction, but to aim to do and the opportunity to follow it when it comes should always be present. So it's very important to remember what accredited certification to ISO 9001 means. So we have to understand what is expected by an organization that is certified to ISO 9001 and that conforms to the applicable requirements of the standard. And we have to keep this in mind when we are auditing, because this will inform a lot on our conclusions, and to reach these conclusions we need to collect evidence that allows us to determine this. So an organization that has a quality management system that fully conforms to accredited certification, as an organization, as a quality management system that is suitable to deliver its products and services and processes, and that is appropriate for its certification scope. She doesn't have a quality management system or the process or procedures of another organization. She didn't bought some documentation templates that it applies indifferentially. His system is unique and adequate to his organization. This organization also understands what his customer needs and expectations are and analyze it. And she knows the organization has access to the relevant statutory and regulatory requirements that are related to its products and services. This is very important. If she wants to consistently provide products and services, she had to understand the needs and expectations of interested parties. She also needs to ensure that product characteristics have been specified to meet these requirements. So she has to have product process in place to translate these needs and expectations into specific product characteristics that can be consistently, that can be the basis to a consistent production or provision of the service. And she needs to determine the manage the process needed to deliver these products and services and to enhance customer satisfaction. The organization also needs to ensure to do this, she needs to have the resources needed to support the operation and monitoring of the processes. So it's relevant that we look at resources. It's not very common, is it, that we explicitly look and assess resources of an organization. The clause is there, We know that it has to be resources. Many things is done by observation. It has a competent people. It has infrastructures. It has the equipment. But do we really assess the way the organization makes resources available and think about the availability of your resources? And also, this organization has to monitor and control the defined product and services characteristics. Applying ISO 9001 also means that the organization aims to prevent nonconformities and has systematic improvement processes in place. The organization also has to implement an effective internal audit and management review process. Many of us will feel maybe a kind of missing the requirement for a documented procedure to make internal audits. I know that many organizations have done it and will not give them away or lose them. But I draw your attention to the need that auditing internal audits, it's not about auditing. There are procedures in place. Everything is documented. There are reports. There are competent auditors. There's also auditing how effective the internal audit is in monitoring the system and providing useful information. And these sometimes, the way we ask for many documented evidences prevent us to really look at the effectiveness of the process and not only as it has been done. And the last issue is that the organization needs to monitor, measure, and continually improve the effectiveness of its quality management system. So keeping these expected outcomes in mind is very important for the auditors to define the audit trails, to define their inquiries during the audit, and to be sure that in the end they have sufficient information to verify that the organization is complying with all this. Let me talk a little bit about the design and development process. Historically, in the ISO 9000 family, and a long time ago, there were 3 standards, 9001, 9002, and 9003. Only those organizations applying 9001 would have to do design and development clause. With the 9001-2000 edition, there was only one standard, and if the organization needs to design and develop, she needs to apply the standard and cannot apply to another version, with the possibility, of course, to exclude it, because not all organizations have design and development. What we observe during these years is that, okay, with the 9001-2000 edition, many organizations start applying the design and development process, but many other resisted to its implementation, even if it could be applied to them and even if they could take advantages from it. Others, we have to recognize, don't need to apply it. As you might be aware, 9001 replaced the concept of exclusion by the concept of applicability and make rules to exclude requirements more strict. I'm not going to enter in detail on this, but the degrees of freedom to not apply a clause are now more strict. On the other hand, we also see there's now more interest in innovation in Industry 4.4, in new technology, and organizations are also more aware on the need to develop new products and services and interested in applying these clauses. So although it might not be relevant entirely to the purpose of the ISO 9001 certification, there's more awareness on the need to have good design and development processes, even to design and develop very simple services and products. What is also recognized is that not all auditors have a background on design and development, and some of them may feel more uncomfortable auditing this clause or objecting to a non-application by the organization because they don't have the experience on working on this. So, keeping all this in mind, it's time to look at design and development process paper. We have to, if we look at the standard, this clause provides a full set of requirements for the process. It's very comprehensive. It can be applied almost directly by an organization. In my experience, many organizations really don't feel the need to have a documented process on these because they can apply the requirements of the standard. And it's also recognized that different contexts, different products and services will require different processes, and many design and development process can be simpler than this, and many others will have very many additional requirements given by its industry or legally defined. The paper on auditing the design and development process provides useful explanations and examples on how to audit this process. One of the things that it helps is the auditor to understand if the organization is or isn't responsible for this process, even when it outsources part of the processes. It also explains what we can expect as different stages of the process, and for each stage, the paper provides guidance to audit and examples. So it's really useful, and we invited you to explore it and as a way to, in case you feel the need to better understand how to audit this process. Finally, let me talk a little bit about the scope paper. The scope paper talks about the scope of the quality of the standard, the scope of the quality management system that is defined in terms of the products and services provided by the organization and the processes that the organization needs to provide these products and services. Also the scope of the certificate and a close relation between the last two. The paper is clear that many times organizations have a scope of the KMS, and then the scope that they put on the certificate is different in the way that is more stringent because they only apply to certain products and services or to certain facilities. But there's a close relation that we can't ignore. The paper will assist the auditor how to fully understand what are the implications in the determined scope of the organization, that, by the way, is documented by the organization, because this scope will determine what processes are in, what outsourced processes are in and need to be audited. It's also very important when we talk about in an audit in the context of third-party certification, there will be a certificate, and the certificate will tell what a company does and what are the products and services it provides. And this scope cannot be misleading. The paper provides some guidance in avoid misleading scope statements. Nevertheless, we know that there's a lot, yes, that needs to be done, so please be attentive because we are revising this according to new problems identified. So this will help you avoiding, knowing how to avoid misleading scope statements. Finally, we also need to define how any non-applicable requirements from ISO 9001, because the organization doesn't need to apply, and how the way it's justified should be verified by the auditor, and it should verify if the explanation provided is reasonable and acceptable. I hope these few examples were useful in presenting what is our work and how it can be useful for your work as auditors. Now I'd like just to finalize, say how to get involved with APG. For us, dissemination and use of this paper is critical because we have a perception that many of its content is valid. In our minds, maybe as some of these papers are not recent, we can ask the question, should it be valid? But maybe it should, because auditing at a global level in very different contexts is not that easy, and that obvious that everything is done consistently in the same way. So we think that a lot needs to be done in ensuring that information from these papers helps auditors and audited organizations do a better job. On the other hand, we need interaction with the users. We need to know if they find it useful, if they need other things, if they need us to talk about other problems. So we invite you to visit our website, to download the papers and explore them, and use them as input to your work. Please remember that although they are freely available, they are ISO intellectual property and they are copyright protected. And so we should respect that. In the website on your right hand, you will look, there's a section on copyright issues, and there's an address, and you can get a permission from the publisher to use the papers. If you're working in or engaged in a national standards body and you want to translate the papers to your own language, you are very welcome, and you should also contact us. Your feedback will be used to define if we need additional guidance document, if we need to improve the ones, and as I told you, they are very welcome, and Mr. Charles Corey, the secretary from Subcommittee 2, will receive your comments that will be analyzed by the group. Here is its mail. Finally, just brief conclusions before ending. Auditing organizations to ISO 9001 at global level and in all kinds of organizations poses enormous challenges to auditors and problems they have to solve. In order to ensure a consistent application of the standard, good practices need to be shared and agreed upon. Problems need to be identified, analyzed and discussed, and solutions need to be proposed. When we say this, we say it in a constructive and quiet way. We don't need to identify problems, to determine, to raise, to take trust from the work, but to build trust in the work, to analyze, to accept problems exist, and they need to be discussed and solutions reached. ISO TC 176 wants to support users to improve the application of the standard and counts on your feedback to do so. So please, either at APG level or on the application of the standard by not only in the context of audit, you're very welcome to give your feedback. In the name of all audited practices group members, we thank Exemplar Global the opportunity to present our work, and I pass Laura's, and I say goodbye and thank you for listening me for this time.
Thanks, Joanna. This ends today's presentation. Have a wonderful day.